Hello and welcome to the Tom's Hardware Show. I'm your host, Sharon Harding, and today we're celebrating Thunderbolt's 10th birthday. Yes, it's a celebration this week, and as always, we're taking questions from the audience. So if you have anything you'd like to ask, just drop your question into the chat on Facebook or YouTube, and we'll try to discuss it on the air. So joining me today is Tom's Hardware Deputy Managing Editor, Paul Alcorn. How are you,
Hello.
Paul?
Pretty good.
Good. We also have Ben Hacker, Intel's Director of I/O Strategy in the Client Connectivity Division. What's up, Ben?
Doing well.
Good, good. And last but not least, Jason Ziller, General Manager of the Client Connectivity Division at Intel, is here with us. How are you, Jason?
Great, Sharon. Great to be here today.
Yes, yes. So Thunderbolt is officially 10 years old this year, but I guess before we get into it, I would hate to leave anyone in the dark. How would you folks at Intel briefly explain what Thunderbolt is?
Sure, I can do that. So as we said, we're celebrating the 10-year anniversary, and so it originally launched on February 24th, 2011. But it's a single connector that has data, video, and power all on the same connector. So you find them on your computer ports, you find them on cables and on accessories that you plug into computer ports. But the benefits of it are, you get high-speed data, high-resolution video, and power for charging, all on a single cable. So it's very simple, reliable, and high performance.
So how did Thunderbolt first come about 10 years ago? What need were you guys trying to fill by creating Thunderbolt?
Actually, it originated in the Intel Labs. So the Intel Labs does a lot of work, innovation on new technologies that may come to market or may be commercialized. And what we found was that particularly on laptops, there's a need for a small connector that's very fast, very capable, and can do data and video and power at the same time, so that you can pretty much do it all with that one connector. So the Intel Labs had been working on that technology, and then we commercialized that and brought that to market initially in the first MacBook Pros in 2011.
So Paul, do you remember when Thunderbolt was born?
I do remember reading. I didn't have any of the early devices, but I do remember reading about Lightpeak with Apple back in the day. That's kind of the origins of Thunderbolt. Does Apple have any involvement in that anymore, or how did that kind of work? I know it was kind of a joint collaboration between Intel and Apple at the beginning.
So there's a couple of questions in there, but so originally it's true that in the Intel Labs, we had originally had an optical solution, thinking to be able to go, the blazing fast at the time, 10 gigabits per second, was going to require an optical connection. So that was the technology that they were developing. And then as we work toward commercialization and, scale out in the market, we realized that the optical solution was really not ideal for that from a cost and from a manufacturing standpoint, designing it into laptops and all of these products. And also at the same time, we came to realize that you could do 10 gigabits per second over electrical. So we modified the cabling technology. So the core, architecture of the technology was the same, but the cabling mechanism went to electrical instead of optical, and that's what we went to market with initially. And so, yeah, we were working with Apple at the time, and with the MacBook Pro, and of course they've been a strong supporter of Thunderbolt, ever since. And so, that's where we are today.
So have you guys called in any Apple execs to kind of celebrate this birthday here?
We've been talking with them. They're excited about it too. They've been on this journey as well. So yeah, there's a lot of companies in the industry that we've been working with. We've been talking to, and celebrating with, because some of the same people, both at Intel and other companies, have been working on this since the beginning 10 years ago. So it's just kind of like Ben was saying, it's kind of before it's kind of interesting or fun to kind of reminisce about, about the old days and, where people are today. But yeah, so it's been a nice celebration with the overall ecosystem and industry.
So, yeah.
I was just going to add on to, when the discussion was happening about some of the motivation for this originally, really, like Jason mentioned, we're trying to get data, display, and power all onto a single connector. But also there's some trends in the industry that I think you've seen accelerate over the last 10 years. And that's one of the reasons there's been a lot more adoption of technology. And that's fundamentally, systems, especially, mobile form factors, are just getting smaller over time. And you want to have potentially fewer and fewer connectors that are smaller. And I think that's been a big driver of some of the interest. And that's why, some companies were involved early on. I think that adoption and interest over time has only grown in this kind of converged technology for a kind of single interface.
Right, and you both talked about the convenience of having it, be a smaller connection. Can you talk about, because right now you're at Thunderbolt 4, right? And that's the same connector as USB-C, but what other connectors has it used? How has that changed over the past 10 years?
So we started early on. We started in Thunderbolt and then in Thunderbolt 2 on the mini DisplayPort connector. And so that was, it was a DisplayPort connector, the smaller version that was, and at the time it wasn't broadly adopted by the industry. So I think that was actually one of the reasons why we didn't see really broad adoption until Thunderbolt 3. And then at Thunderbolt 3, what happened was when we were thinking about Thunderbolt 3 and wanting to double the performance, we needed a new connector. The mini DisplayPort connector wasn't designed to go that fast, and so we needed a new connector. So we were saying, well, should we define a new connector from the ground up and have all the computers add this brand new connector? Or is there one that's already on a trend to be able to support the needs of Thunderbolt? And that's where we kind of intersected with USB-C. The USB group had been working on it. Same kind of trend, right, that the industry had. Smaller, thinner connector, reversible, that could support higher speeds and could support more power. And so we said, well, these are all of the things that, that we're looking to do with Thunderbolt. And also the USB-C connector was designed to support multiple protocols or be able to run other protocols than USB. So we kind of joined forces at that point and are running the overall Thunderbolt solution on the USB-C, mechanical connector.
And so I think you have a couple products that you can share with our viewers.
Sure, I have. There's a number of Thunderbolt 4 laptops that have been coming out. Let me see if I can find the right angle on it. So sorry, you can see the USB-C connector there right at the tip of it by the hinge. And there's one on each side, over here as well. And actually on this Dell XPS, this is the latest one with 11th gen core. It's actually an Evo laptop. It just has one Thunderbolt 4 port on each side, and that's all, that's all that it has. And actually with 11th gen core, we've integrated Thunderbolt 4 into the Tiger Lake, CPU. So we're seeing very strong adoption of Thunderbolt 4 in most of the 11th gen core laptops. It's also required in the Evo laptops and also the vPro laptops going forward. So we're seeing a lot of adoption there. And then on the accessory side, there's some new Thunderbolt 4 docks coming out, and you can see this one. If you can see the 3 Thunderbolt ports there, the USB-C ports. The Thunderbolt 4, one of the new capabilities of it is on the accessory side, you can drive up to 3 downstream Thunderbolt ports. So in the past, we could only do 1 downstream port. And so if you wanted to connect devices together, you would have to daisy chain them in a series, right? With Thunderbolt 4, you can do, it's like a hub, kind of a topology. You can connect devices in parallel, like a hub, and you can daisy chain actually behind them as well. So you have a lot more flexibility to connect all of your devices together. And because Thunderbolt 4 ports are universal, you can connect anything to them. You can connect up your USB devices, your displays, your Thunderbolt devices. Everything can connect, to those Thunderbolt 4 hubs and docks. So it's very flexible.
So, yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Just one thing I was going to ask about. I think that it's really interesting that before Ice Lake, a lot of the laptops probably had fewer Thunderbolt ports, particularly because of the extra components. It needed a component, a controller outside of the chip, that, complexity, power consumption, things like that. Since you guys have now integrated that into, I believe it started with Ice Lake, correct? And then and now it's integrated into Tiger Lake. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about what kind of advantages that gives?
Yeah,
it's integrated into the PCH particularly, correct, and the CPU.
Yeah, so maybe I'll talk to that, Jason.
Sure.
There's several benefits, but if you think about what a kind of data and display integration really means from a discrete controller standpoint, you basically have to have kind of data lines and display lines and some other logic that's connecting from Intel's SoC, whether it's the PCH or the CPU. There's a bunch of kind of routing that needs to happen on the board. Not to mention, to your point, Paul, like the controller is maybe discrete, it's a little bit bigger, there's maybe some more power consumption. When you integrate that, you really allow for form factors, not just for power reasons, but for overall routability, for layout of like a notebook to make it more thin and light generally, and to make it kind of a reduced size PCB. All those benefits accrue when you're integrated. So generally moving to integration has kind of, I would say, manifold benefits on layout, on power, and there are some performance benefits just like generically, but we integrated essentially kind of the Thunderbolt 3, Thunderbolt 4 level of capabilities. It's essentially the same performance as discrete, but maybe in some corner cases, the integration provides a little bit more underlying benefit as well from performance. So.
Cool.
How much interest is there for Thunderbolt on desktops versus laptops?
So we've seen on desktops, I would call it more of a follower segment, in the sense that the value proposition of having a very small, thin connector that you can connect everything to and expand, outside of the computer, and also the charging capabilities, very important in laptops, but on desktops, you don't have that same thing. So I think we've seen that in general, and even USB-C, ports of any kind, have been lagging on desktops because, desktops have the room for lots and lots of connectors, and they actually like to have lots and lots of connectors. They don't need charging, and they have, if you want PCI Express expansion out of the box, they have add-in cards that you can put into the desktop. So I think there's a lot of reasons why, it's a lagging adoption, but I think that we're starting to see more adoption. I know in the last generation of some of the motherboards and desktops, we're seeing increased adoption of Thunderbolt 4. I think that with USB 4 as an industry standard, the desktops are going to want to adopt, the next version of USB. So I think over the next couple of years, we're going to see a lot more adoption in desktops.
Good. There was a motherboard. There are some motherboards that are coming that are supporting Thunderbolt 4, and there's also like an add-in card. ASUS, as a matter of fact, introduced an add-in card just the other day. I believe it's the first add-in card for Thunderbolt 4. Now, I know that you guys have Intel has a lot to do with the certification of these kinds of things to enable interoperability. Do you guys, does Intel certify even things like those add-in cards or on motherboards, like how well it works, essentially?
Yeah, everything that uses the name Thunderbolt or the logo or something gets Thunderbolt certified. So all those motherboards, they get put into a system and, run through the certification process. And the add-in cards would get put on the motherboard that they're supposed to work with, and then the whole system would get Thunderbolt certified. So yeah, we do that.
And there's also a certification process even for the cables, correct? Like one thing that's really interesting is a lot of people have problems with DisplayPort cables, and there are a lot of them out there that are not certified by Visa, and they don't work well. So do you guys are all Thunderbolt 4 cables that you buy, do they all have to be certified? unlike DisplayPort, for instance.
Yeah, that's correct. We do have actually a more rigorous process on cables because they are very, complex in a way in their manufacturing. And there are, even on USB-C, there's a lot of connectors in the cables in the market that haven't been USB certified. And I know, especially early on, there was a lot of issues with a lot of them. So we have, a limited number of vendors that we work with, cable vendors. And we not only certify the cables, but we do audits of their factories and their manufacturing lines, and we have them do ongoing checks in their lines to make sure that not only can they put out one cable that passes the certification, but they can do it in their manufacturing consistently over time. So those are some of the additional checks that we put in.
Neat.
And I had a quick question in terms of like the docks. You mentioned you're able to do 3 downstream instead of 1, like you were limited to before Thunderbolt 4. Can you explain like how that's technically doable now? Like what Thunderbolt 4 has that makes that a possibility?
Yeah, essentially when we kind of, and we can talk a little bit more, I think, about like the open specification process that we went through as we moved from Thunderbolt 3 to Thunderbolt 4. But essentially we went about upgrading kind of the required capabilities as we were looking at Thunderbolt 4. And physically the silicon we make that goes into kind of the peripheral side or the dock side in this example, basically for accessories, we essentially integrated some additional logic and capabilities. At the end of the day, for a user, it means, hey, you have additional ports. The actual complexity in the silicon is there's quite a lot there to ensure that all the ports can share the same capabilities, and the user experience, no matter which port you're plugging into, is going to be identical. But it's really fundamentally down to the silicon we're selling into the accessory products, no matter who they come from, now has that capability. And different vendors can do maybe 2 or 3 or 4 connectors. It depends on their choice for their products, but that's an option that's available for vendors who are developing docking products or other hub-like products.
So we have a new series of discrete controllers. So as you know, we have it integrated into the 11th Gen Core CPUs. We also have a discrete host controller for the PC side for systems that maybe don't have, the 11th Gen Core CPU. And then we have a new device side controller, accessory controller. These are 8000 series if anybody's looking. But on that accessory side, that controller has that capability for the 3 downstream ports that Ben was talking about.
Okay, and just a reminder to any of our viewers, if you have any questions for our Thunderbolt experts, don't be scared. Drop it into the chat and we'll try to get to it. We do have one question. Question is, will Thunderbolt continue to move in sync with USB, or could it possibly add some new features on top of USB in the future?
Well, let me just say that Thunderbolt for Intel is a solution. It's an end-to-end solution. So what we do is we take the USB and other specs and we build an end-to-end solution out of it. So, looking at the USB 4 specification, Intel contributed the Thunderbolt protocol and Thunderbolt, underlying architecture to the USB group, and that's the basis of the USB 4 spec. But the spec as a spec is a series of optional features. And frankly, for an industry spec, it should be, because the minimum requirements to be USB 4, they wanted to scale all the way down to a phone, right? So what we do with Thunderbolt is we've created an end-to-end solution with a set of requirements and capabilities that computer users want to have, in their computers and in their devices. So that's really what we've done with Thunderbolt, and we're going to continue to do that with Thunderbolt. So we will move forward in sync with USB. We started first with that connector and cable convergence, and then we have the architectural convergence. As we move forward, as USB 4 evolves, we'll continue to be converged on those elements of it, but we'll continue to provide features and capabilities above that, or just the optional features in the USB spec that we make required because we know computer users want them. But there's other things too, like there's a lot of USB specs like the PD for charge, for power delivery, and other things. So we put them all together into a Thunderbolt solution. So for Thunderbolt 4 computers, thin and light laptops, we require charging on at least one port. We require, the ability to wake the laptop from an external keyboard and mouse. We require better, security so that the port is not vulnerable to attack. So all these things, are either optional in some USB spec somewhere, or maybe they're completely outside the scope of USB that we put all together into Thunderbolt. But definitely the underlying architecture, we will continue to be in sync with USB.
Yeah. And in addition to that, all those things Jason mentioned, absolutely correct. And there's also some underlying kind of performance requirements that we also put in place, right? This is all about data and display of multiple protocols going across a single kind of solution. And so we also want to enforce from a Thunderbolt ecosystem that your kind of minimum performance bar within the overall speed of the connector is also very high. So there's a whole bunch of elements of that end-to-end solution that are really important. And open standards are often very, very flexible, and that's great. But Thunderbolt is a really good way to kind of convey to the user, hey, this is a best-in-class kind of PC class experience for this kind of connectivity.
Cool. And then you had mentioned the security with Thunderbolt 4. I know that it is now required that it uses Intel's VTD technology. Can you kind of explain what that does and why that's needed?
Yeah, maybe I'll handle it, Jason, and you can chime in as well. So yeah. I'll just say from our Thunderbolt 4 standpoint, we require a kind of VTD or equivalent technology. So it's not like a requirement for an Intel CPU specific or anything like that. It is open, but specifically the underlying element of that Intel technology, and there are other architectural versions of it, is around kind of DMA protection. So the security concern that people sometimes have when they first learn, if they're very technical, about Thunderbolt as a solution or USB 4, is we're taking PCI Express as a data packet, or a data interface out of the box. And PCI Express is very high performance, and it also allows, as part of its protocol, the ability for a device to access main memory. So DMA, right? And what VTD can provide is the ability to kind of isolate main memory. So for this PCIe device, the portion of memory that can be accessed is restricted, right? So your PCIe device can work wonderfully and is very high performance, but a rogue or attacking element can't be plugged in and kind of access main memory to get access to sensitive details, without your authorization. So essentially, that is kind of the requirement we have in place for securing this, is ensuring that the PCIe devices on the other side are restricted in how they can access main memory. So you still get the performance benefit of PCI Express and the flexibility of all the products that enables, but you don't have that security concern.
And sorry, just what does VDT stand for, and can you find that elsewhere?
It's VTD, and I think it's available searching under like Intel virtualization technology.
Okay.
Yeah, it's virtualization technology for directed I/O. So it's actually VT-D.
Yeah, there you go.
Now I get it.
Kind of walls off the memory.
And by the way, in VTD, I think includes other things other than the specific, memory mapping that I was just talking about. But that's the specific element for Thunderbolt 4 that's relevant to this discussion.
Okay, so yeah, we've been talking a little bit about USB 4 already. Can you guys explain why did Intel decide to share the protocol for Thunderbolt protocol for USB 4, and why now as compared to maybe an older generation of USB?
I can say things, maybe Ben, you can add, but I think, as we move to the Thunderbolt 3 and the USB-C connector, as I mentioned, that really was kind of a game changer, really, in going to the USB-C connector, because the industry was going to be broadly adopting that connector over time anyway, because it's thinner and smaller and reversible, so much better connector, than the original USB Type A connector. So we saw that, so we started working, a lot more with the industry, and getting, feedback from them on what they wanted to see as Thunderbolt evolved. And so, one of a couple of the things that, came up were, hey, integration into CPUs and also, opening the specs so that it can be an industry standard, and that other companies can also, create silicon and solutions around it. So actually in 2017, Intel did a public announcement saying that, we're driving Thunderbolt mainstream, and we're doing two big things to do that. One is to integrate in Intel CPUs, and the second is to open the spec to the industry. And so by 2019, we had delivered on both of those. So
yeah, and I would just kind of add on top of that. I think any kind of new technology always has a tension between, is there enough broad interest for people who think it's very, very urgent to get a wide standards body ecosystem really focused on it. And I think that took a little time for the idea behind Thunderbolt to really be strongly, engaged within the community, within the open standards, to really push it. And I think early on, it made sense for a more focused effort that was maybe a little outside of that standards process. But I think anything that's really going to get broad adoption and really have robust ecosystem support really needs to be an open standard. And so as we kind of went through the path of this technology, it really became clear that to really take it as broad as it needs to be and have it be truly kind of accessible for everyone, I think an open standards path is really the right way to go. And so, as Jason mentioned, in 2017, we kind of made that announcement, and we'd also been looking at that, even before then, what was the right time to kind of open everything up, because you have to have the ecosystem really all looking in the same direction, facing the same, way, and saying, hey, we're going to go drive this fast, right? And that's where we got to, and it's been quite nice.
So since you guys have made that move, have you seen broader uptake? I mean, I feel like just subjectively, I've noticed a lot more Thunderbolt docks and laptops over the last few years, especially with laptops. It seems to be picking up.
Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier, is that between those two things, integrating in the CPU, and particularly with the 11th gen core, Tiger Lake CPUs in the last half a year, plus the opening the spec and, having USB 4 as an industry standard, I think that the two of those things have really increased the adoption. We're seeing, most, it's not an illusion what you're saying. Most of the 11th gen core laptops have at least one Thunderbolt 4 port.
Were you surprised, Paul, to see that happen, to see them open that spec to the industry? Because that kind of changes the competitive landscape, at least slightly, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was definitely good. I read a stat the other day. I think they've had 80% more notebooks over the last two or 3 years that now have Thunderbolt 4. I read it in an article somewhere. So opening it up was definitely the right thing to do. And, it's always good to open things up, because that is generally what makes it mainstream, and helps drive down costs too. So when you look at like the price of a Thunderbolt 4 dock today compared to the price of a Thunderbolt dock like 4 or 5 years ago, the difference is it's a lot more affordable now. And I think some of that comes from broader adoption, of course.
Yeah, we've also done, on the ecosystem side, we've done a lot of things to drive more mainstream price point products. So Intel does reference designs and enabling with the industry to deliver products with, varying capabilities and varying price points. Like I showed that OWC dock a little while ago, which is kind of a full-fledged dock. It has the 3 Thunderbolt 4 downstream ports, and then it has USB Type A, and it has Ethernet and other things. So it's a full-fledged dock. But some other companies have also come out with what they're calling a Thunderbolt 4 hub, which is, really maybe the 3 downstream Thunderbolt 4 ports and maybe a couple of Type A USB Type A ports as well. But those are selling for, $149, $139. So the price points are very affordable, and the capability is, pretty amazing, really, for what you're getting for that price point. So we're seeing a lot more of that.
I think, just as a general observation, the USB spec, the naming on it, is probably one of the most complex things in technology. I am telling you, it is like trying to figure out the space shuttle. I mean, like the
That's why we said keep it simple. Just look for the Thunderbolt.
Yeah, so you have the cables are a bit confusing, and there's like 3 different names. So if we just boil this down for the viewers at home, if you get a Thunderbolt 4 cable with the Thunderbolt thing, the logo, excuse me, for everything Thunderbolt 4 and USB 4, correct? Because USB 4 is kind of where you guys, now that you're part of, the interaction there, that's where things get confusing, because I mean, I could go on for days about the naming scheme. I'm sorry, I apologize, but it's,
I do know what you mean, and also, like, if you could also, sorry to interrupt, but also like the difference between Thunderbolt 4 and USB 4. If you could break that down too, I think that's relevant.
Yeah, I was going to say, we talked before about Thunderbolt, being a solution, and the USB 4 spec is designed to have very low minimum requirements that could go into a phone. And so if you saw a USB 4 port on a computer, you really don't know what the capabilities are. It could be only 20 gigabits per second, not 40 gigabits per second, because the minimum requirement's 20. The minimum video requirement is very low. It's like, Ben, I think 1 HD display, right? And PCI Express is not required. So there's a lot of these capabilities that we make required in Thunderbolt. So that's that's the difference. You with Thunderbolt, we talk about, it's peace of mind. You know what you're getting. It's going to be the same. And especially we've evolved that even more strongly with Thunderbolt 4. You have very good consistency of that best-in-class capability that will support all of these different kinds of products. So we actually, when we were coming up with, defining Thunderbolt 4, we got a lot of feedback from the industry and from end users. We did some end user research, a couple of years ago, and got a lot of feedback on what they would like to see. And actually, the performance was one, vector of it, but there are 2 other pillars that we talk about: simple and reliable. And so the simplicity aspect, having a single cable that you plug in and connect to everything and charge your laptop at the same time, that was very compelling. The reliability aspect, having a consistent level of performance, data and video performance, Ben talked about, and having that security, right? All of these things, gives you peace of mind. So those were actually, strong vectors that we built on, with Thunderbolt 4.
I do give the USB some grief because of the naming schemes, because like USB Gen 3.2, Gen 2x2, and there's all these different levels. But one thing that you do have to hand them is they are USB. They've been around forever, and they are compatible. And that is a huge cross to bear when you're designing new architectures and going for higher speed, is to maintain that compatibility. How do you guys see compatibility with Thunderbolt 4 moving forward as you're attempting to move beyond the speed you're at? I mean, do you think that you can still do that on a Type-C cable, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak to that a little bit. I definitely think, and we're not making any new announcements today. We were joking about earlier, but we are absolutely looking at within the standards context, how do we take this technology and move it forward? And there's a bunch of work that's been in place, and the development within the standard has been trying to make sure we have a line of sight to kind of get to a higher speed in the future. I'll just definitely say what I think we're pretty confident of is for at least another speed bump somewhere, and who knows exactly what that is, but call it roughly a doubling. I think we can definitely stay within the electrical kind of communication path and on the same connector. So it's truly a familiar, backward compatible, fully solution. And then I think, there's always the question, as we look out further, do we need to make some change beyond that? But at least for kind of the next step, whenever that comes, I think we're pretty confident that we can keep that on the kind of same, mechanical interface, same connector, roughly the same topology.
Yeah, see, I was, the next question was, when are we going back to optical? I mean, I want to see the most complex thing, just, encoding with different wavelengths and colors of light, performance.
Yeah. It's very cool.
They can do some pretty interesting stuff with optical, silicon photonics, all of that. When am I going to have silicon photonics in my phone?
So all of those, I know those were hypothetical advancements you were discussing or theoretical, but should those come out, that would be in a Thunderbolt 5, right? Like you wouldn't do a Thunderbolt 4.1, 4 Gen something.
We don't know what the branding will be going forward, so couldn't say one way or the other. But I would emphasize, like Ben said, it will be compatible. We want compatibility across Thunderbolt, previous versions of Thunderbolt and USB, as well. So that's an important aspect.
So we do have a question in terms of more bandwidth. What would a user actually do with more bandwidth? Would it enable new use cases?
Yeah, so I can touch on that a little bit. My kind of, from a technology, roadmap standpoint, one of the things that is kind of like call it a North Star for us is just kind of looking at history and how things have developed, right? I've been at Intel for 20 years and various different kinds of IO technologies. And the one thing that we always kind of run into is like, in 5 years or in 3 years or whatever it is, what are we going to do with this next thing? And that's a great question to ask, and I'll directly kind of give my thoughts on that question in a second. But also, it's nice to just look at history and say, hey, on kind of client PC products, we have these external connectors, various kinds, right? Look at HDMI, look at DisplayPort, look at traditional USB, and those connectors have within the same kind of mechanical form factor have typically been doubling their performance in terms of just raw bandwidth every 5 to 7 years, and that's probably been true for 20 or 25 years. And I think just at a baseline level, from a technology standpoint, we kind of always look and say, hey, we should probably look at maintaining that trend, and always question, is that the right trend or is it accelerating or slowing down? But just at a high level, that's kind of where we're operating. Specifically within the idea of Thunderbolt and Type-C and the USB standards in this context, I think there's a bunch of things that are moving technology forward. So display resolution and potentially like refresh rate are continuing pace, right? You already have display standards that are going upwards of 60, 70, 80, 90 gigabits in some cases. And if you have a single wire technology that's designed to do the best display, the best data and power all together, it needs to kind of be able to encompass not only displaying the display traffic, but also doing workflows that involve rendering or editing or recording that content as well, right? Also, today our kind of data path bandwidth within Thunderbolt 4 is kind of aligned to like a PCIe Gen 3 by 4 performance. And for some of our storage applications, you're seeing storage in that kind of form factor already doubling in speed. So there's already a need for kind of higher performance storage for maybe NVMe SSDs or desktop RAID arrays that are going to be able to consume more than the 40 gigabits of bandwidth or just under 40 that we can provide today. So I think those things, really high resolution, concurrent workflows that are both display and kind of working on the data itself, as well as just the storage media getting faster. I think those are all things that are going to, if you look at a few years, I think there's going to be demand there for a higher speed interface. And just one last comment, like anything else, maybe it starts, in the premium space, but I think it waterfalls down over time, faster than we think just where we stand today based on history. So.
I mean, that when it comes to storage, that is a very good observation. Thunderbolt 3 SSDs are surprisingly popular, especially as we're moving to faster controllers and flash. Thunderbolt 4. I'm not sure if there's actually, I was just Googling, is there a Thunderbolt 4 SSD yet? But I'm sure there will be soon. So,
by the way, I mean, when Thunderbolt 3 came out, one of the big trends, you talk about broader adoption. I think one of the other trends was that, when we first started, with original Thunderbolt, we could support a 4K display at 10 gigs. 4K was like, premium, pro. But by the time Thunderbolt 3 came out, supporting two 4K displays was, kind of expected. It was commonplace. I mean, 4K monitors were under $500. They were pretty prevalent. And then people were shooting 4K video, on their phones even. I mean, so it was like everywhere. So I think that helped drive, fuel the adoption of Thunderbolt 3 and then of Thunderbolt 4. In the enterprise, by the way, another macro trend was, docking's very big in the enterprise, like 50% attach rate to laptops. And they were using the mechanical docks. So you would, plug your laptop, snap your laptop into one of this big, long docking connector that was heavy and expensive. So because there was a need for thinner and lighter laptops, they wanted to get rid of that docking connector. So there was a move to cable docking. So Thunderbolt 3, was a great solution for that. So we saw a great kind of inflection there or intercept of that trend, with Thunderbolt 3 docks. And you're seeing those pretty prevalent in the enterprise now.
Yeah, and Thunderbolt 4. With the hub, the hubs definitely make things a lot easier for sure.
Yeah.
Speaking of making things easier, I know when Thunderbolt 4 was announced, Intel mentioned making eventually up to 50-meter long cables. I think at the announcement, you were announcing 2-meter long cables. Is that still in the works? Or is it already available?
Yeah, so on the electrical cables, we have those out to 2 meters. We are working on an optical cable. There's your optical right there.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the optical,
Forgot to bring it up. We are working. We had in previous generation optical cable up to 50 meters. And so we are working on delivering that as well now. Probably not till, next year timeframe, but it's being under development. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, with that type of for that type of a length requirement, what would a typical use case for that be? Are they connecting their laptop directly to the data center?
Yeah, so maybe I'll chime in on that. And there's also some interesting technical things about that kind of cable as well. But some of the applications we've seen are kind of, isolated room scenarios. Maybe that could be your workplace tied into like a data center, for example. Also some studio applications and some soundstage kind of professional audio applications have been highlighted. There is a one of the challenges, you mentioned earlier was around, hey, a cable doesn't support all the kind of, not only Thunderbolt and USB 4, but the kind of existing USB 2 and USB 3 capabilities. One of the challenges with a super long cable like that is there is some just physics that limits true compatibility. So USB 2, for example, which is very basic, but it's assumed to be in all these cables, all these Type-C cables, Thunderbolt or not. And if you have a cable that's more than 5 meters, you can't have USB 2 in the cable just due to some of the protocol realities. So any cable that's kind of optical and long like that it's not going to have power wires. It won't have USB 2. So it really is more of a, I don't want to say maybe niche is the right term, but it's really a custom application type cable because it has some things that just fundamentally can't be there.
Interesting.
So do you guys have anything else to share in terms of what's next for Thunderbolt? I know you've had 10 years of fun, but in terms of what's up for the future?
We're looking forward to the next 10 years now. Well, we're going to continue to innovate on it as we talked about. I think, right now also the next couple of years, we're really looking to see this adoption of Thunderbolt 4 continue to scale out. As I mentioned, it's required in Evo and vPro laptops. So I think we're going to see a lot more adoption. And then we're working with the accessories to do a lot of different kinds of products, different sizes and shapes, of docks and hubs. And the full featured ones do charging, but we're seeing more and more chargers that ship with notebooks that are Type-C chargers, and so you could have a dock that that doesn't have its own power adapter, but just plugs into the Type-C charger with your notebook. So there's some efficiencies you can get by kind of bundling those kind of solutions. So we're just looking, working with the ecosystem and the industry on, really trying to make great solutions for users, to meet their needs, and especially with today's environment, working from home and learning from home and everything, you're doing at home, to be able to tailor some solutions along those ways. Driving, seeing more monitors with Thunderbolt 4 and docking and other capabilities that are fully integrated. If you have a monitor with a camera or with a speaker or with some kind of sensors and things, you can't do that with just a display port or, HDMI connection or something. You really need a Thunderbolt connection that's going to give you full data and display. So we're looking at, a variety of different kinds of solutions like that. So that's probably, I think in the next year or two, be looking at, those kinds of things. And then longer term, as we said, we're working on innovating Thunderbolt and, and USB more. And, we'll see what that looks like.
Sign me up for a monitor with an integrated camera and one cable.
I'll tell you, the people that we work with that have like a Thunderbolt, docking monitor, they love it because it's truly just a single cable coming from the monitor, and then everything else is plugged in behind the monitor, and it's just a very nice, clean desktop, very nice solution. So, people really appreciate that.
Well, before we wrap up, I do have one more thing, because I don't think any birthday is complete without sugar and fire. So unfortunately, we're not all together. We only have one cupcake for myself to enjoy.
You can't blow out candles because of COVID now. It's terrible. Last time I seen Jason, there are no trade shows.
But we can cheers to Thunderbolt's birthday, and hopefully some more innovation beat around this port, other techs, and just anything that just makes connectivity and life just simpler for everyone. So here's a little treat.
Well, we do
all a cupcake when we get together in person.
Yeah. We do appreciate the birthday celebration. We'll be celebrating all year, by the way, so
Perfect. Well, thank you to everyone who's been watching. If you've had fun with us, please like us on Facebook and YouTube. We really appreciate it. And don't forget, you can download each episode of the Tom's Hardware Show as a podcast. So first, thank you to Paul for dropping by, and to our Intel friends, Jason and Ben. Thank you so much, and happy birthday to Thunderbolt. That's our show. We'll see you next Thursday.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.